Asterisk, the snow fell gently that December evening, each flake catching the warm glow of the street lights like tiny stars finding their way to Earth. Margaret had always loved the first real snowfall of winter. At 32, she still felt that childhood wonder whenever she watched the world transform into something soft and magical. Asterisk, she was walking home from the community center's holiday planning meeting, her heels clicking, against the sidewalk that hadn't yet been touched by snow. The vintage grey skirt she'd chosen that morning swished gently as she walked. The black polka dot bow at her waist a small tribute to her grandmother's sense of style. Even in the cold, she'd kept her white blouse like she'd always run warm, a treat that had served her well during countless winter evenings like this one. Asterisk, her blonde hair swept up in the bubble ponytail that had become her signature style, caught snowflakes that melted almost instantly. She was thinking about the evening ahead, perhaps some hot cocoa and the book waiting on her nightstand when she heard it. Asterisk, a small, broken sound. The kind of crying that comes from deep inside, when someone is trying very hard to be brave but can't manage it anymore. Asterisk, Margaret stopped walking and listened. There it was again, coming from the small park area near Miller's General Store. She turned toward the sound, her breath visible in small puffs as she quickened her pace. Asterisk, that's when she saw him. Asterisk, a little boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, crouched down in the snow near the park bench. His grey winter coat was too big for him, making him look even smaller than he already was. His dark hair was dusted with snowflakes, and his shoulders shook not just from the cold, but from the kind of sobbing that breaks a person's heart to wetness. Asterisk, without hesitation, Margaret made her way over to him, her heels sinking slightly into the snow with each step. She didn't think about her clothes, or the cold, or the fact that she didn't know this child. She simply knew that someone small and sad needed help, and that was enough. Asterisk, hello there, she said softly, crouching down beside him in the snow, her skirt pulled around her as she knelt. But she paid it no mind. I'm Margaret. Are you okay, sweetheart? Asterisk, the boy looked up at her with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. His cheeks were red from the cold and wet with tears. For a moment, he just stared at her, as if he couldn't quite believe that someone had stopped to notice him. Asterisk, I'm lost, he whispered finally, his voice barely audible above the gentle whisper of falling snow. I was walking with my dad, and then I turned round and he wasn't there anymore. Asterisk, Margaret felt her heart squeeze. She'd been lost once as a child at a summer fair when she was about this boy's age. She remembered that terrible feeling of being alone in a world that suddenly felt too big and too scary. Asterisk, what's your name? She asked gently, settling more comfortably in the snow beside him. Asterisk, Tommy, he said, wiping his nose with his mitten. Tommy Carson. We were going to get hot chocolate at Miller's, and I saw a dog across the street, and I wanted to pet it, and when I looked back, his voice broke again. Asterisk, oh, Tommy, Margaret said, her voice full of warmth, I bet your dad is looking everywhere for you right now. He's probably worried sick. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to, and gently brushed some snow from his shoulders. You know what? I think we should get you somewhere warm while we figure out how to find him. Asterisk, Tommy looked at her with those big, serious eyes. You won't leave me too? Asterisk, the question hit Margaret square in the chest. No, honey, I won't leave you. We're going to figure this out together. Okay. Asterisk, she stood up slowly, her knees protesting slightly from kneeling in the cold snow, and extended her hand to Tommy. After a moment's hesitation, he took it with his small, mittened hand. Asterisk, come on, she said. Let's go into Miller's where it's warm. Mrs. Miller has known everyone in this town for 40 years. If anyone can help us find your dad, "It's her," asterisk, as they walked toward the store. Margaret noticed a man standing near the entrance, partially hidden in the shadows by the warm light spilling from the windows. He was watching them, and something in his posture suggested he'd been there for a while. She couldn't make out his features clearly, but she could sense his attention. Asterisk is that. She started to ask Tommy, but the boy was looking down at his feet, concentrating on not slipping in the snow. Asterisk, they reached the store just as the man stepped forward into the light. He was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and the same dark hair as Tommy. Though his was streaked with early silver at the temples, his winter coat was open despite the cold, as if he'd been running. Asterisk Tommy, he called out, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. Asterisk Dad. Tommy let go of Margaret's hand and ran toward the man, who swept him up in a fierce hug. Asterisk, I was so scared, the man said, his voice thick with emotion. 1 minute you were right beside me, and the next, he held Tommy back to look at his face. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Asterisk, I'm okay, Tommy said. This lady helped me. She said her name is Margaret, and she promised she wouldn't leave me. Asterisk, the man looked over Tommy's head at Margaret, who was standing quietly, giving them space for their union. The gratitude in his eyes was profound. Asterisk, thank you, he said simply. But those two words carried the weight of everything a parent feels when their child is safe again. I'm David Carson. I've been looking everywhere. Asterisk Margaret Sullivan, she replied with a gentle smile. I'm just glad I heard him. He's a brave boy. He was trying so hard to be strong. Asterisk David set Tommy down, but kept a protective hand on his shoulder. We got separated somehow in the crowd near the square. I've been retracing our steps for the past 20 minutes, calling his name. He shook his head. I was starting to panic. Asterisk, I got scared when I couldn't find you, Tommy said quietly. But Margaret sat with me in the snow and told me you'd be looking for me. Asterisk, sometimes. Margaret said gently, the kindest thing we can do is simply sit with someone who's scared. Just being there can make all the difference. Asterisk David studied her face in the warm light from the store windows. Here was a woman who had knelt in the snow in her good clothes without hesitation, who had comforted a stranger's child and stayed with him until he was safe. Her blonde hair was dotted with melting snowflakes, and there were wet patches on her skirt from milling in the snow. But she seemed completely unconcerned about any of it. Asterisk, can I at least buy you a hot chocolate? David asked. Or dinner? It's the least I can do. Asterisk Margaret started to shake her head, but Tommy looked up at her with those big eyes. Please, Dad makes really good pancakes. And we could make hot chocolate with the little marshmallows. Asterisk she found herself smiling despite herself. There was something about this father and son, something about the way David had looked when he'd found Tommy safe. Something about the gratitude that was so genuine it made her chest feel warm. Asterisk well, she said slowly, I suppose I am pretty cold, and I do love hot chocolate. Asterisk with marshmallows. Tommy asked hopefully. Asterisk especially with marshmallows. Margaret confirmed. Asterisk as they walked together toward David's car. The snow continuing to fall gently round them, Margaret reflected on how quickly an ordinary evening could become something meaningful. She'd simply been walking home, thinking about her book and her cocoa, and now she was part of someone else's story, a night that Tommy would probably remember for the rest of his life. Not because he got lost, but because he learned that kindness from strangers still existed in the world. Asterisk, you know, David said quietly as they reached his car. Tommy's been having a hard time lately. His mom and we divorced last year, and some days are harder than others for him. Asterisk Margaret nodded, understanding. Change is difficult, especially for children. But he's lucky to have a dad who loves him so much. Asterisk, thank you, David said, again. And this time the words held even more meaning. Not just for finding him, but for being exactly what he needed tonight. Asterisk, as Margaret settled into the passenger seat and Tommy chatted excitedly about marshmallows and pancakes from the back, she realized that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as ordinary evenings. Sometimes being in the right place at the right time isn't about grand gestures or dramatic rescues, it's about simply choosing to stop, to listen and to care. Asterisk, the snow continued to fall as they drove through the quiet streets, and Margaret found herself looking forward to whatever the evening might bring. After all, it had already brought her something precious, the reminder that a little kindness, offered freely and without expectation, could warm hearts even on the coldest winter night.